Hello, and welcome again to another edition of Father Tim Talks. Today's topic, what I want to do, is kind of following up on the last one about the church, and I'm going to look a little bit at the Catholic Church throughout the world. It's what I call the world church. Catholics around the world are very diverse, and so what we want to look at today is just a little sample of how the church is enculturated throughout the world. In other words, how the culture of various areas around the world has had an effect and is brought forth and enlivened by the Catholic Church. This much of what I have here is from a presentation by the Reverend Michael C. McFarland, a Jesuit for the Center of Religion, Ethics, and Culture. And no, it is not a relative of mine. What he does is explores a little bit of the religious lives and practices of contemporary Catholics in diverse countries and cultures throughout the world. And I also have some of my own additions to this. What it goes to show basically is although there's a lot of diversity in the various cultural effects throughout the Catholic Church throughout the world, there is a unity. We are all still Catholics throughout the world. First country I want to look at is Brazil. The charismatic movement is very prominent in Brazil. And according to a recent survey, about one half of the Brazilian Catholics are charismatic. Charismatics, if you don't know, are a group of folks who really emphasize the gifts of the Spirit, and they're very enthusiastic. These small charismatic prayer groups flourish in about two-thirds of Brazilian parishes, and so it's very prominent. And there are some charismatic groups here in the United States, but it seems to be a real phenomenon among the parishes of Brazil. Here's a little church that I happened to visit many years ago. It's in a town called Ouro Preto in Brazil. And on Good Friday, you see the church in the background there. They do a big enactment of the Passion, and you can see a lot of the people gathered there, and then the actors portraying Jesus and the two thieves being crucified. Processions are very big in Brazil and many of the Latin American countries and a few others, as we'll see. They figure very prominently, and over to the left, you see some street paintings which are made of sawdust on the streets. And these are ways in which the local people kind of participate and often are made by just the people in the neighborhoods. This was procession, a Corpus Christi procession in a small town that I happened to visit in Brazil. And again, you see, the street is just covered with the sawdust and these kind of street paintings. And no one walks on these. They just walk by them and admire the work of the artist in putting these together from the neighborhood. And then when the procession starts here, you can see the monstrance, the procession in the background. They walk over the paintings. And so the paintings are destroyed, which, the beautiful work there, and then they're just destroyed, which was kind of an interesting phenomenon. This was another interesting phenomenon that I came across in one of the churches, in kind of an ante room of the church. In this room, as you can see, there were kind of plastic replicas of heads, of feet, of hands, and then a lot of pictures on the wall. And what people did in the church is they prayed for healing, or perhaps someone who had died. The pictures there, but if they were healed of some ailment, they would often bring a replica of the anatomy that they were healed from, and it was just fascinating. In Brazil, this was along the coastal region of Brazil. There's an indigenous religion called Candomblé, and the Brazilians kind of took some of this and kind of gets mixed a little bit in with Catholicism. Over to the right, you see the goddess of the sea, and then she looks remarkably like the Blessed Mother that's shown on the left. And you'll see kind of a little ribbon hanging from the statue of the Blessed Mother. They would use these ribbons as kind of a token of their appreciation. You find them all over the place, and you can see some of them along the flower arrangements to the Lady of the Goddess of the Sea in Candomblé. A lot of they did some what we call syncretism, where some of the practices of the old religion they used to kind of adapt people into the beliefs about Catholicism. And this was a frequent occurrence in Latin America in particular. Another country in Latin America I want to look at, and some that we probably would be familiar with, especially here in our cluster parishes, two prominent feasts, Our Lady of Guadalupe and the Day of the Dead. You can tell by the graphic here, the picture here, this is Juan Diego, who saw an appearance of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and then Mary appeared on his cloak when he showed the bishop who wanted proof of his vision. And then you'll see some of the roses on the side, which appeared in his cloak as kind of a sign of the Blessed Mother. One of the things that the Our Lady Guadalupe showed for the Mexican people is an affirmation of God to these people. It affirms the indigenous people because Mary, what she was wearing was very similar to some of the things in the ancient Aztecs, like the color of her vestment, and you could see hanging down in the middle there, kind of the black sash that was around her. That was a sign of women who would be pregnant would wear the black sash. And here you see a replica of Mary appearing to the Aztec people. It was an affirmation of God's presence in the Americas because Mary, when she talked to Juan Diego, spoke Nahuatl, which was the Aztec language. So she was speaking in the native language of the people, again, affirming that God's presence was with them. Another very prominent one is the Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead. This is a reminder to the Mexican people that from birth, death is always a constant companion, and kind of as an accepted friend to be joked with and played with. There's not that fear of death that we sort of had, but it's kind of a companion, and they kind of joke about it in some ways. Families at this time, it's usually around October 31st through November 2nd, they make and decorate altars in their homes. And there's a belief here that the gates of heaven are open at midnight on October 31st, and the spirits of all the deceased children are allowed to reunite with their families for 24 hours. And then on November 2nd, the spirits of adults come down to enjoy festivities that are prepared for them. This is an example of a family altar that's displayed. You'll see here with lots of fruits, with flowers, and they decorate it, and these are in their homes. And these are some folks who are wearing masks. They're kind of skulls with lots of flowers there as a way of kind of poking fun at death. And children often receive candy skulls. You'll see some to the left here, which are chocolate, and then over to the right top there, again, some candy, and then the bottom right is candy. So they will have fun with these. It's a treat to receive, and to us it may seem rather morbid, but to the Mexican people, it's kind of a, poking fun at death. And here is a cemetery in Mexico where people usually will camp out on November 1st, the evening, and kind of, that the dead are still very much a part of their lives. And they look, to make some kind of communication with the dead. You can see that the graves are all decorated with flowers, and very colorful flowers. One of the other characteristics of Latin American people is their devotion to the suffering Jesus. The people of Latin America suffered a great deal from their colonizers, and so they really kind of identify with the sufferings of Jesus. In this statue that you see here to the left, it kind of depicts the real suffering of Jesus. You can see, it's very gruesome, and they really identify with that suffering. as suffering was such a large part of their history. And in fact, many statues in Latin America are covered with real cloths and have human hair wigs so as to make Jesus more identifiable to seem one of us. It makes it more realistic. In the country of Chile, Mary tends to have a very prominent role among the Chilean people, and another phenomenon called the Anamitas. You can see here a statue of Mary, and again, she's covered with a real cloth, and she has a robe there of cloth. And then to the right, you'll see a board here with lots of little notes, and these are called ex votos. They're written in thanks to Mary for the figures they receive. You can find these in churches and different shrines and so on. The Anamitas. This is a term that's used only in Chile. The Anamitas are roadside shrines, and these tend to be more popular in rural and in poor areas. It memorialized people who died suddenly, often victims of auto accidents, but also from drug violence or political violence, which drug violence is still going on in many countries in Latin America, and political violence has kind of shrunk a little bit from its heyday back in the 80s and the 90s. These are not simply memorial markers, but often served as places where believers can ask for special intercession of the people who died suddenly, as if the suddenness of their death gave them special spiritual powers that people tried to tap into. Here's just a couple of pictures of some of the Anamitas. They're off at the side of the roads, and you'll see some of these in this country, like the crosses along the highway where a person was killed. But as you can see, these Anamitas tend to be a little bit more prominent. Some of them being quite elaborate. And we also, CPPS, have missionaries in Chile, and here's a couple of our priests with some parishioners there in Chile underneath the watchful eye of St. Gaspar. In Ethiopia, food and fasting tend to play a prominent role among Ethiopian Catholics, as well as the Feast of Mescal. Foods and fasting. The norms for the Catholic practice are often set by the Ethiopian Orthodox practice. Ethiopian Catholics follow a lot of Orthodox fasting rules. Many will fast twice a week on Wednesdays and Fridays, with no food allowed before the end of the new Mass, which the new Mass ends about 2 p.m. After which time they would eat no meat or dairy products, including cheese, butter, or eggs. But they can eat and drink many other things, as the author put it, including beer. During the 40 days of Lent, Christian butcher shops are often closed entirely because they abstain from meat during the 40 days of Lent. Mescal. Mescal competes for the top billing in the lives of believers, right next to Christmas and Easter. Mescal celebrates the finding of the true cross in the early 4th century by St. Helena. On September 26th, the eve of the feast day, the people prepare the demera, which is a tall pyramid of branches that looks like a fir tree from a distance, and it's topped with a cross of mescal flowers. And as darkness begins to set in, the demera is set ablaze, and then many will use the ashes from the demera to mark themselves with the cross. Here's a picture of a demera being set up. You can see it does kind of look like a fir tree, and then the cross at the top of the mescal. The demera then begin to set afire. You can see people carrying flames here to set the demera on fire. And here's a demera that's burning. Now, in India, a couple of things kind of shape Indian Catholicism. One of them is caste, and then the other, like in Latin America, are festivals and processions. Caste. As many of you probably know, caste is a system of dividing society into hereditary classes. That although caste has been officially outlawed for many years, remnants of caste still exist in India and among the Indian people. And it's interesting that many of the Indian Latin Rite Catholics are of Dalit caste origin, which was the caste that was considered untouchable. Portuguese missionaries were especially successful among these lower caste fishermen along the coast, and that's where a lot of Catholicism took root and then spread to the interior of India. Here's a shrine of some of the Hindu uh, spiritual realities. And it's interesting to note that Catholic saints and religious figures often share holy sites with Hindu deities. You can see in this picture here Jesus off to the right, and then the Hindu gods' manifestations of Vishnu in the center and on the sides, and they're right together there. And again, like I was talking about processions, here we see kind of a devotee touches the Pieta of Our Lady of Good Health. And Hindus and Indian Catholics almost always touch religious statues as a sign of respect or of a physical connection and as a way of developing a mutual affection. And we see this man reaching out to touch the statue of Our Lady of Good Health. We also have CPPS priests in India, and you see also some of a picture here of some of our priests next to the St. Gaspar Retreat Center. In Jamaica, a couple of issues affecting Jamaica are marriage and the family, and then also death and afterlife. Marriage and family. Marriage is seen as a marker of middle class status, but the numbers of marriages are becoming very less. They're very infrequent now. In recent years, almost 85% of births in Jamaica are to single mothers. That's quite a number. The marriage rate in the last decade has declined while the divorce rate has increased. So it tends to be a very big problem among the Jamaican people. Churches in Jamaica often note a particular problem in attracting and holding men in their congregations, even though the membership of the Catholicism is equivalent, about 47% male, 53% female, but the males tend to be absent from worship in congregations. Death and the afterlife. Catholic beliefs in Jamaica are influenced by a set of Afro-Jamaican cultural beliefs about witchcraft, evil, spirits, and possession that really has an effect on their practice. Um, Obia. Obia is a set of ritual practices used to influence the many spirits in or around us to cause bodily harm. We might know some of it as like voodoo. Funerals for Jamaican people who have died are often held 9 days after their death to allow the duppy or the spirit to depart the body. A duppy of a deceased person might linger after death, inhabiting its own house or extracting revenge on persons who have mistreated it. And then on the ninth night, the duppy departs permanently. And so the ninth night involves singing, dancing, and drinking to kind of wish the duppy well on its journey to the afterlife. In the Philippines, one of the major festivals there, or feasts, is the Feast of the Black Nazarene. Pong Itam na Nazareno is what it's called. It's celebrated on January 9th, and millions gather for the 6.5-kilometer procession with a life-size statue of the suffering Jesus fallen under the weight of the cross. Again, the Filipinos have had many causes of suffering in their lives, and so the attraction to the suffering Jesus is very prominent among the culture. The most determined of these devotees walk the 6.5 kilometers barefoot. And they also wipe the cross or the foot of Jesus with the cloth. It's believed to rub off some of the miraculous power and the curative abilities of the statue. Sons of the Nazarene, they're clothed in yellow or white shirts, form an honor guard for the black Nazarene. And most devotees are poor and, again, as I mentioned, can identify with the suffering Christ. Here you see a picture of the procession, and you'll see a number of the people in the yellow shirts served kind of as the honor guard interspersed with people. A lot of people for that procession. Here's a young boy with a statue of the Black Christ. And here is the statue itself. You see the Black Christ carrying the cross, and then in the yellow and kind of maroon colored tunic that he is wearing. In Africa, in Uganda, a big celebration there is the Feast of Charles Lwanga. It celebrates the Feast of Charles Lwanga and the Ugandan martyrs. There were a total of 45 Ugandan men between the ages of 14 and 50 who were killed by the King of Buganda between 1885 and 1887. There were 22 Catholics and 23 Anglicans that were killed. This feast is celebrated on June the 3rd. And on the feast day, Mass runs about 5 hours starting at 10 a.m. and it includes considerable singing and dancing in the traditional styles. 5 hours of Mass, folks. The liturgy combines a varieties of Ugandan traditional culture with standard Roman liturgical forms. So again, it's kind of a bringing together of the indigenous culture along with the traditional Catholic. You see a group of people out in the fields there preparing to celebrate the Mass. Here is one of the churches in Africa dedicated to Charles Lwanga. And you can see it's built, it's sort of crafted like a modified African hut. It is steel here, but the way in which it was kind of made for and represented the African culture. And here's a stained glass window with a picture of Charles Lwanga. And again, we have CPPS missionaries in Africa. They're in Tanzania, and this is just a group shot of some of those missionary priests of the Precious Blood in Africa. One of the things, the projects that they did, the Tanzanian province, together with the Sister Adorers of the Blood of Christ, or the ASCs, they work with orphan children in Dodoma. There are lots of orphan children from parents who died of HIV/AIDS, particularly like in the 90s. Here you see a picture of one of the ASC sisters and one of our priests with some of the children there at the Village of Hope. In China, the last of our countries, ancestors and daily life of China have its influence in the church. The Catholic population is increasing in China, as estimates of the Catholics in China range from about 6 million to 12 million. It's up from about 3 million in 1949. It's still hard to kind of get an exact number because in some places the Catholics kind of have to remain underground. As we say here, the churches are either registered or unregistered, and government regulations require places of worship to be registered. Open or official government-approved churches are all registered. Underground churches are unregistered, and sites of worship that refuse to register are illegal and subject to closure and repression. So it's not exactly freedom of religion as we know in this country. Catholic belief in China has been influenced a lot by the folk Buddhist beliefs. Funerals. Buddhists actually were more adept at funeral rituals, although there were some in Confucian practices as well. Catholic funerals are often elaborate day-long affairs involving enclosure of the body in a large wooden casket, and then a banquet for extended family and a long procession of relatives wearing white burlap mourning garments. Extended family is very important in China. Catholic funeral rituals differ in that the family members do not kowtow or bow to the casket. They don't burn incense sticks or mock paper money as they do in the Confucian rites. And they don't set out offerings of food at the gravesite either. Again, these are more Confucian practices. Unlike the Buddhist Confucian practices, Catholics do visit grave sites on the Feast of All Souls to maintain those connections with their dead ancestors. Mary and the Saints, Catholic, China, in Catholicism, was shaped in large part by the 19th century French missionaries who brought images of the Immaculate Heart of Mary and St. Joseph alongside images of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus. And there are similarities between the Earth Mother of folk Buddhism and Mary in Chinese Catholicism, who's often depicted in robes like those of a Chinese goddess. Again, bringing together some of the indigenous Chinese beliefs with Catholicism. Mary, the gentle, compassionate Mary, is often portrayed, even in Chinese household, as a slender, brown-haired European woman dressed in blue and often openly displaying her immaculate heart. Here's one of the pictures here in a Chinese home. You can see the picture of Mary there in the back center. This is a picture of a Chinese church. You'll see some of the red lights hanging from the ceiling and the red cloths. Red is a very prominent color in China, and it's very important to them, as you see the various shades of red in this church. And here is an altar of Mary in a church. Again, you see the red kind of lettering, the cloths along the side there, and some red flowers gathered. So this is some of what we see in the church throughout the world. I thought it would just be interesting for you to see how Catholicism is kind of lived out in some countries throughout the world, just as we have kind of taken some of our cultural beliefs and in terms of our church decoration and architecture. So too, Catholicism has taken those in various countries throughout the world, but we still have here one holy Catholic Church. Thank you for stopping by at this edition of the Father Tim Talks.